Hey, it's Patrick Lovell, truth bombing you on the evening of Friday, May 19th, 2023 at approximately 7:30 p.m. my time. And God, man, the last couple of days for me has been horrific. It's been tough and it's been challenging. And I'm going to express a little bit about what that means, but I'm going to put it in context to what I know a lot of us are probably experiencing. But within the context of the latest drama playing out in our political process and how it gets spun and yarned and all manners of circus bullshit in media regarding the debt ceiling. Now, uh, just the basics on this, the basic mechanics. There's a difference between fiscal policy and a difference between fiscal and monetary policy. And over the course of the last, I don't know, 13 years, as I've been bringing to you pretty much relentlessly, we've spent north of $70 trillion, plowed $70 trillion, and I don't think that's all. I kind of do the math based on $29 trillion that I have all the evidence of in 2009 and what that led to, which enjoyed the further ramifications of quantitative easing, which I think are somewhere between 13 and $16 trillion. So you just do that, the math there, 40, 43, 46 trillion, plus 22 trillion in 2019 based on the repo runs, and then all manners of form of what happened during COVID. That doesn't mention the nature of 0% interest. And what has that gotten us? A whole lot of suffering. I mean, commercial real estate right now in San Francisco apparently is just cratering. And I know that there's a shit ton of available commercial real estate all over the country. And most of the mainstream media, talks about changes in post-COVID like, work and so forth. But they don't have a clue of what commercial backed securities are and quantitative easing, which is the real reason why everything is so fucked up in elevated prices and just ridiculous prices in real estate, given the fact that there is so much inventory. So if you know anything about supply and demand, does that make sense? Well, the backdoor fucking purchase of the Fed at 100% on the dollar through quantitative easing is how the fuck this whole thing is structured. So that's part and parcel, but you got to put that in a context to this stupid, ridiculous, insane, drama being played out with the debt ceiling. Yeah, America's $31 trillion in debt. Okay, I think credit card debt is up in that realm as well. Okay, that debt is what we are, a debt-fueled society. And then you have the Republicans saying we've got to keep our house in order, but the regular household is not what the government is. And then ultimately, they're debating over, roulette over things that, the government can, spend whatever it needs to into existence, period. And the entirety of what happens in the economy is ultimately based on productive capacity. And what most of you don't understand, and the mainstream public doesn't understand because mainstream media doesn't get it, is the difference between monetary policy, which I just laid out at the beginning, which backstop an international criminal syndicate, where we show you in the con at www.thecon.tv exactly how that worked, and not millions of you know this because we got suppressed by the fucking, technocracy or the villain of the Borg behind the scenes, which is our tech companies. Which of course everybody on the right's like, oh my God, check out the Twitter files and what they've done with the likes of Tucker Carlson and whomever else. Whatever, man. I've got the $29 trillion truth that buried hundreds of millions of people around the world, 50 million of which, were in the United States. That covers everybody who were in homes and in every shape or form of that. What we call homeowners is kind of a catch-all, and then to pensioners, and then all sorts of other people in the whole matrix of the system that blew up based on this massive, calamitous racketeering fraud that was all illegal to the tune of tens of millions of fucking felonies that nobody went to jail for, and then we gave trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars to the guys that did it. This puts Oceans 11, 12, and 13, which I think sum total of those movies with Brad Pitt and George Clooney and so forth, $170 million tops, compared to what I'm telling you is now about $70 trillion. 70 trillion in context to what? What are we going to debate? The fiscal policy of what? 600 military bases around the world, a bloated military budget, and then what? Medicaid, and then all of these other programs that the people that have been devastated by this scenario that I'm laying out for you have no one fighting for them. But really, McCarthy and the Republicans, what they're really doing is they're basically trying to prevent a new energy transformation. and grid technology and all of those things that could turn us into a renewable engine, as opposed to the fossil fuel paradigm that we've been living on for 50 years, 70 years, that led to, over the course of the last 20 years, 9/11 and 20 years of war that went nowhere, all to feed this bloated Pentagon process. And these guys are going to get jacked about what people that have been ripped up and destroyed by this system that got set up, that are in the streets that they can't get any help for. Okay. Meanwhile, Congress can do whatever it wants. MMTers are always talking about get 535 people on the same page. Oh yeah, there's 535 people on the same page because they're getting paid by the corruption to do everything that's in destroying everybody else. And so here I am, still the Pied Piper, the guy in green, Patrick Lovell, whose last name means the wolf. The bottom line is I'm leading a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. Because if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in decency and dignity, integrity and liberty, but most importantly above all of those things, I should say in symmetry with sustainability. Because this whole thing is meant to completely purge misery and tyranny and create a freaking renaissance of the technology. If all of the money in this system flowed to things that were dynamic, that the United States has every capacity to do, as opposed to complete insane corruption that's just manipulated by the biggest idiots I have ever seen in media. Media is a complete fail. They are idiots. They're all just parsing out what kind of reactionary circus they get to people to listen to what sort of ideology fits within their little square box, so that we can create identity war between everybody so that these guys can do whatever the fuck they want behind the scenes. Listen, 9/11, we know that the CIA recruited several of the hijackers. We know that the FBI knew exactly what cells were here, how they were getting funded. The CIA and the FBI weren't talking to each other, even though they had ridiculous evidence. For example, these guys getting lessons in Minneapolis or in Minnesota. I'm not sure exactly where they were in Minnesota, but they weren't learning to land. We had evidence of them wanting to fly into buildings. That sort of stuff and so much more. And I think of the tune, I think our industrial intelligence complex was like, I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars. 20 years ago, but it was still, we had so much technology to be able to find out who these guys with box cutters that wound up, hijacking 4 airplanes and flying into the trade centers, the Twin Towers, and then ultimately the Pentagon. And, the last one, the guys rose and said, no, not us. We're not going to let you plow us into, your terrorism game. We're going to plow you. And so they stood up and they did it. And by the way, when I made my first film, I went to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. I buried myself and baptized myself in the mud of Shanksville. And I'm coming from that perspective. You got to fight when the system has gotten hijacked. And that's exactly what I'm revealing to you. It's so polluted. It's so corrupt. It's so insane. And nobody is going to fix it. Not one presidential candidate, although I've got my eyes on one, but at the same time, he's got flaws. Nobody on their own island is going to be able to defeat corruption. It's going to take tens of millions of us on the same page. And why am I the Pied Piper? Because I spent 13 years getting the evidence that the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and AGs around the country couldn't coordinate to be able to take down the financial terrorists of our financial system. We have spent trillions of dollars making the richest absurdly rich with insane socialism. I call it corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to guarantee the mafiocracy that in turn is now fueling fascism. In my world, we have got to defeat corruption. We have got to defeat fascism. The only way we're going to do that is if you come on board. I'm telling you, the only way we're going to save the day, our country, the world, is if we, the people, get on the same page. It's not about me. It's about you plus me equals we, the people. The only thing I'm coming with is the $4.5 million investment in a truth that has the $29 trillion truth and everything to back it up. that the Borg buried. BlackRock buried it. The entire system buried it. And yet I've got the story that can liberate and legitimize and blow the lid off of the largest revelation of criminal conspiracy in the history of the world, because everybody in power, from Congress to SCOTUS to the judiciary all over the country, the judiciary I just witnessed this week, they're continually allowing foreclosure mills and servicers to use documentation fraud. The exact same kind of shit that we're seeing Donald Trump investigated for with the elector certifications. They do that over and over and over to steal property. Because we spent trillions of dollars to the primary dealer brokers that are the too big to fail banks that are using that money to steal property from the poor, because we give trillions to the ultra rich. Are you a patriot? Patriots aren't MAGA. You can't be against corruption and for MAGA. You can't be pro-life and for Republicans. You can't have hysteria about Epstein and his sex trafficking culture and turn your eyes to everything that's been happening for hundreds of years in the Catholic Church and many other places. I mean, the dystopia, the mental gymnastics, the stupidity, the ignorance, the cowardice, the insidious behavior of complicit con artists just spell corruption. I've had enough. How about you? I'll finish with this. I'm going through the final pieces of a divorce that's been taking a long time to manifest. I never imagined in a million years that I'd be in this position this many years later, but it was this story that led to me and my wife not being able to make it, because it almost killed us in 2008, and it eventually got us again in 2020 because of the same scenario. After I made this monumental story that hundreds of millions of people need to see, and it's fallen on deaf ears because the Borg has drowned it. She couldn't handle it, and I don't blame her. I blame myself for trying to carry the truth to the millions of people that need to see it. I've come this far. I'm not going to quit, but I can tell you the collateral damage from the very beginning to now. My son, who's the most important person in my life, his entire high school career was destroyed by this. Yeah. The American dream turned American nightmare. I never in a million years would I have thought any of this would, in my wildest imagination, have happened. But it did to me, and it did to millions of other people, and they've gotten away with it. We've got to arrest the power. We've got to rip the control of power back from the corrupt, and we got to bulldoze corruption. And the only way we're going to do that is if tens of millions of us come together. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards.